Football season is back, and that means another edition off of Electronic Arts' great sporting franchise, NFL roster update. That's kind of what it's become, and that's pretty bad considering the rosters can be manually updated and uploaded into the community server. But long before EA monopolized the football gaming world and then stopped trying due to a lack of competition, the Madden games usually evolved a great deal from year to year. The franchise wasn't always king shit, and couldn't rest on their laurels and pump out a new game with only a few minor tweaks. They had to establish themselves, and there was actual competition. I'm not going to go through every single game in the Madden series here. Instead, I'm going to highlight the games during the 16-bit era. There were versions on both the Sega Genesis and Super NES, but I'll be focusing on the Genesis versions simply because these were the games I grew up on. So it all started in 1990 with the release of John Madden Football. This was before they started attaching the year of release to the title, although they always did this for the upcoming year and not the year of. So in this case, the game would have been John Madden Football 91, even though it came out in 1990. Actually, to be even more accurate, this wasn't even the first Madden game, as there was a PC version also known as John Madden Football released in 1988. But like I said, I'm only doing the home console versions from the 16-bit era, and really this Madden is essentially based off the original version, so for whatever that's worth. Out of the 28 teams that were in the league at the time, you can only choose between 16. And they didn't have license to the NFL or the NFL's Players Association. So while the teams are based off the real NFL teams, there are no player names, team names, or logos. Unlike most football games at the time, the game plays vertically instead of horizontal, which has become the norm ever since. The passing game features windows that pop up so you can see further downfield. Unfortunately, there's no indication how far downfield they are, so you have to judge it off of the play you chose, which go through 3 phases during the selection process. First, you choose your set, your big guys, fast guys, hands team, etc., then your formation, and then the actual play. It's pretty deep for 1990. If you change your set, you have to wait for the players to substitute, which slows down the game a little bit. But I like the realism of the pace of the game. Plus, it forces you to keep the same formation on consecutive plays if you want to run a hurry-up offense, because there's no proper hurry-up mode in this game. In fact, what's fucked up is that in later Madden games on future generation consoles, you actually save time by calling your play normally rather than using the hurry-up, because the substitutions automatically happen, and no one has to sprint to the line if you complete a 40-yard pass. Everyone just magically teleports. So time management actually made more sense 20 years earlier. Game modes were pretty sparse. There was no season mode, let alone the franchise and owner modes years later. Although for no reason whatsoever, they list exhibition games as regular season. What a fucking tease that is. Aside from the aforementioned exhibition games, you also have a sudden death overtime mode, which is weird, and a playoff tournament. While the graphics and animations are minimal, there are certain aspects that are actually better than later 16-bit Maddens, like the player size in proportion to the field, and the overall flow and pace of the game. The music is really cool, too. Gotta love EA's early 90s Genesis soundtracks with the distorted, dirgy guitar sounds. There's definitely room for improvement, though. It's a pretty bare-bones football experience, but just based solely on the gameplay, it's surprisingly still pretty fun, as outdated as it is for a simulation-style game. John Madden Football 92 picks up where its predecessor left off, kicking things off with an awesome intro song. These early Madden Genesis soundtracks have that road rash feel all over it. While the game looks and plays almost identical to the first Madden, the features are expanded greatly. There's still no NFL or NFLPA license, nor can you play a full season, just exhibition games, which are still inexplicably called regular season games, and adding to that cock tease is the fact that there's a preseason mode. Why the fuck is there a regular season mode that only plays exhibition games and a preseason mode that does the exact same thing? I'll never know, but you do have all 28 teams plus the All-Madden All-Star team, a larger playbook, instant replays, 4 different types of weather conditions, and the ability to play a multiplayer co-op game against the computer. You get a good chunk of statistics during halftime and the post-game. There are little video clip pop-ups of crowd reactions, and you can get flagged for unsportsmanlike conduct after blasting someone way after the play or for hitting someone out of bounds. Something that's not only realistic, but also hasn't been included in most of the Madden games ever since. That's not the only thing modern Maddens have omitted. when you get close to a first down, they'll actually bring out the chains and measure. I honestly don't know if this has been remedied or not, as I haven't played a Madden game in the last few years, but this is something that hadn't been included in at least a decade and a half after this. It adds drama and intensity in those short yardage, third and fourth down situations. Another feature that was only included in this edition of Madden that fans are begging to be brought back is the ambulance that comes out onto the field to bring an injured player away. It just races out onto the field and bowls over whoever else is in the way. It's fucking hilarious. John Madden Football 93, much like Madden 92, plays virtually the same as its predecessor, but it doesn't add as much to the mix this time. There's still no NFL or NFLPA license, you still can't play a full season, and there are no new game modes. So what is new this time around? There's a coin toss. I'm kidding, that's not the only addition, but most of it is pretty minor too. Aside from the All-Madden team, your other bonus teams are 8 historic teams from the past, like 72 Dolphins and the 85 Bears. There's also a hurry-up offense, including a ball spike in the playbook, but unless you're setting up a field goal in the closing seconds, I'd just as soon run a play. Other than that, there's really not much else, although Madden's voiceover commentary in between plays makes its debut. It's not much, and the sound quality is distorted as hell, but it's one of the first football games to include commentary, so I'll give it that. Madden 93 is still a fun game overall. It's really the same game as 92 with a sprinkle or two of additions, but this is the least ambitious Madden game of the era. If any 16-bit Madden fits the mold of being classified as a glorified roster update like the later games would, it's this one. Plus it scrapped the hysterical ambulance.
Hey, he'll remember that number.
The 94 edition of Madden was the first to feature an official NFL license, so the first thing that changes is the title. It's not John Madden Football 94, it's Madden NFL 94, and that would continue to be the format to this day, and now we get the team names and logos. There's still no license from the Players Association though, so there are no player names, but it's a step in the right direction. The biggest new feature by far is the ability to play a full season with a save feature. The presentation is a little sleeker, the play call screen is improved, and includes a bluff mode so you can hide your play call from a human opponent easier. There are more statistics, you can preset your audibles, and you can flip the alignment of your play. For the first time in Madden history, the graphics have undergone a facelift. The player sprites are larger this time around, although this causes them to be a little misproportioned with the field, but the field is tilted a bit more so you can see further downfield. But not far enough as you still have the passing windows. The sound quality is disappointing though. The sound of the hits, the crowd, and the quarterback barking signals are all pretty muffled and or distorted. Even John Madden's commentary is even more distorted than it was in 93. But like its predecessors, it's a solid, balanced football game that holds up pretty well today. Madden 95 was the first game in the franchise to include licensing from the NFL and the NFLPA. So now you've got NFL logos, team names, and player names, the whole fucking 9. The players look better. The sprites are still big as fuck, but they're at least smoother, and the sound quality is much clearer this time around, including a cool version of the NFL on Fox theme, which is still used on TV to this day. The gameplay is more or less the same as 94, although the speed is picked up a bit for this one. The most notable change, however, is the elimination of the passing windows. Now you can see exactly where the receivers are on the field, and it's been this way ever since. It makes a huge difference in the passing game and prevents you from making mistakes by misjudging where a receiver is. It really sucks when you don't convert third and fourth downs because you hit a receiver way short of the first down marker. You actually can still use the passing windows if you want, but thankfully the default option has them off. Madden 95 was probably the most beloved of the Madden games of this era, and for good reason. It added the season mode, added the player names, subtracted the passing windows, and fine-tuned the gameplay in general. So it's arguably the best football game at the time. Madden 96 introduced the Create a Player feature. You can create up to 10 players at any position you want and play through several different drills to establish your player's attributes. The players look very similar to Madden 95, but they're even faster now, as if it wasn't fast enough to begin with. EA had the same problem with NHL 96 by speeding the game up too much. Something about these 96 games. So now things are getting out of hand with the proportion. The players are too big and too fast. But they did put their numbers on the jerseys, which was a nice touch. Despite the overboard pace, 96 does remain a fine football game. It's definitely a step back in terms of gameplay, mainly due to the increased speed, but there's at least some enhancements, including the aforementioned Create a Player mode, the ability to trade players, and several bells and whistles, including numbers on the players' jerseys, like I mentioned, and a better-looking field. Madden 96 could have been the peak of the series in this era had it not been for a few hiccups in the gameplay department. Madden 97 thankfully slowed the pace of the game down from ludicrous speed back to plain old regular light speed. The players don't look as sharp as they did in Madden 96, and they don't have the proper numbers on their jerseys anymore, but the animation is smoother. There's not really much in the way of new features, but as always there are tweaks. Like now there are more penalties, including some that you have no influence over whatsoever. Before it was just pass interference, offsides, or in some cases unsportsmanlike conduct, all of which were a direct result of you causing the penalty to happen. Now you've got shit like holding and face masking that happen at random. As frustrating as this can be, it does make things more realistic. Sometimes you just catch a break, and sometimes it goes against you. Plus, these penalties can be toggled off in the options menu. You also don't have to bother with those drills when creating players. You just pick their name and profile information, adjust the attributes, and you're done. There's not much drastically different about the gameplay aside from the speed, which really does make a huge difference. At the end of the day, Madden 97's pros outweigh the cons more than any other Madden so far. It had all the bells and whistles and weeded out most of the weaker elements, although they still haven't brought back the ambulance. Madden 98 was the final Madden game released for both the Genesis and Super NES, and holy shit were they ever beating the fuck out of a dead horse with this one. By this point, this was the second game of the franchise released on the next generation consoles. So I guess since all the focus was on these new versions, they decided to basically recycle the 16-bit versions almost completely. It's basically a twin of Madden 97, only this one keeps records of the biggest plays, and players have arbitrary hot and cold streaks. I know Madden 93 was almost a clone of 92, but at least there were some things added, or in some cases subtracted, like the ambulance. This game adds nothing of note, really, and the vast majority of the game is a replica of its predecessor. Even the fucking theme music is the same as 97. I take back what I said about 93 being the roster update version of the 16-bit era games. It's still a good game, but it loses points for being essentially a carbon copy. And since there was such little effort in producing this game, I'm going to put the same in the review and just end it here. So I've mentioned in my reviews of the Tecmo Bowl and Tecmo Super Bowl NES games that one of the reasons why those were by far the best NES football games was that they simply got the gameplay down by focusing mainly on a fun arcade style. Football games that tried to get realism down at the time were just unable to execute with the limited hardware. Years later, around the time of PS1, things had changed and the simulation style was able to work. And that's mainly what I look for in modern sports games. The more realistic, the better. In between is the 16-bit era, which I feel balances the scale between arcade and simulation. These games may not have aged nearly as well as the aforementioned Tecmo Bowl games, but they do still hold up surprisingly well. And that wraps up this edition of Aqualung's Game Reviews. See you next time.